Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is TVP World. You're watching World News Tonight. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. Our main focus tonight is Ukraine's diplomatic offensive, as Kyiv hosts high-level talks with top Western diplomats. But first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz discussed Germany's decision to strengthen border controls. Poland calls for stronger NATO support for Ukraine. Central Europe braces for worst flooding in years. Germany's recent decision to enforce strict land border controls has raised concerns among its neighboring countries. In response, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk is working to create a unified front, calling on the European Union to hold Germany accountable for its actions.
Following Monday's announcement from Berlin, Germany's governing coalition is set to introduce stricter border controls across all 9 of its land borders starting September 16th. Now, this decision has raised concerns about the future of the EU's passport-free Schengen zone, a cornerstone of European integration. Now, since Berlin's decision, Poland has been urging the European Commission to step in. Though under the Schengen Code, the implementation of border checks remains within the jurisdiction of individual member states. Now, on Thursday, the European Parliament's Committee on Civil Liberties met in an extraordinary session. This was called by Polish MEPs from the EPP group. Now, those MPs want to issue debated at next week's plenary in Strasbourg that voiced their concern about the future of Schengen.
Europe is a project of unification, not segmentation, not bordering in this regard. So that's why I fully support this concern. And if it goes, it will be like avalanche. Each and every of EU will start rebuilding borders, and nobody will win.
When questioned about whether Parliament's efforts would prompt a stronger response, a Commission spokesperson maintained a cautious stance.
We're not in the habit of telling you before that we're going to make statements at a specific point in time. So please bear with us. We know what are the developments that are ongoing. Obviously, the Commission is monitoring the situation very closely, but we have said all that we could say on the issue in the previous days.
With the specifics of the new border measures still unclear, many are taking a wait-and-see approach ahead of the September 16th deadline. Now, on Friday, in an attempt to calm tensions, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk agreed that greater cooperation and dialogue are essential to addressing the challenges of migration and external border security. Nevertheless, as border controls loom, one of the foundational principles of the European project remains in jeopardy, with no clear resolution in sight. Reporting from Brussels, Sasha Farbach, TVP World.
Germany's debate over immigration has reignited following 2 violent incidents involving knife attacks by migrants. Starting Monday, the country will reintroduce border checks as a part of a strategy to address the issue. However, doubts remain about whether this measure will produce meaningful results.
Germany is on edge when it comes to migrants. Today, another Syrian was arrested in Bavaria. He allegedly planned a machete attack on soldiers. Last week, it was a 29-year-old Albanian. He was arrested after threatening to kill police officers in the town of Linz am Rhein, situated south of Bonn. He is suspected of sympathizing with the Islamist terrorist group ISIS. In addition, there was of course the Solingen stabbing attack at the end of August that saw 3 people dead and involved a suspect from Syria. The 26-year-old was arrested after an extended manhunt. Spurred by all those incidents, together with the electoral successes of the far right in 2 of Germany's eastern states, Chancellor Olaf Scholz has taken a tougher stance on immigration. Border checks have become a cornerstone of his new policy.
The number of people coming to us has fallen because of the border controls, for example. We have decided that we will continue to do so at all borders in Germany for as long as possible.
But it is unclear whether reintroducing border controls will noticeably solve the problems that the German government has identified.
They can be used in case there is an acute fear that that people who would be currently planning to do a terrorist attack would be planning to come to Germany, but of course they do not help against somebody who is already inside Germany.
In fact, border controls have the potential to introduce new problems that need to be dealt with. Austria has already announced it will not accept undocumented migrants that are pushed back by Germany. Could even result in the same problems that Europe has faced during previous border crises, but in the heart of Europe instead. The measure might not be worth it.
In the worst case scenario, what this could mean is having camps outside the German borders if persons have been prevented from entering.
It's also questionable whether Scholz can undercut the far right by catering to an anti-immigrant sentiment. If anything, it could backfire. The lack of immediate results could potentially stoke anti-immigrant sentiment even further in Germany. European citizens and tourists will for now only be bothered with longer waiting times before entering Germany. For now.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski was in Kyiv today for discussions with the Ukrainian government as it pushes for the easing of restrictions on the use of Western-supplied weapons inside Russia. Joining us live from Kyiv is our Ukraine correspondent, Oz Chatterjee. Good evening, Oz. What more can you tell us about Sikorski's visit?
Well, it was a rather wide-ranging visit from Poland's top diplomat today. The formalities, went to the wall of remembrance for Ukrainian soldiers that have died, placed flowers there, but also held quite high-level diplomatic meetings today alongside his Lithuanian counterpart, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Lithuania. They both had a meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv today to discuss a wide range of issues. The biggest on the agenda is Poland's support for Ukraine being able to use long-range Western weapons inside the territory of Russia, something that's been a real major diplomatic push over the last couple of weeks, in particular with the Blinken and David Lammy visiting from the United Kingdom and United States of America, respectively. So it's been a busy diplomatic week in Ukraine. Now, there were some other issues that were touched on in these meetings between Zelensky and Sikorski. They included Ukraine's eventual accession into the European Union and to NATO. Poland, again, is a big support. Zelensky also raised another particular issue, Sikorski raised rather, with Zelensky, and that's the Volhynia massacre. Sikorski was asking President Zelensky for movement on the exhumation of Polish people massacred in Volhynia during the Second World War, during the German occupation of Ukraine by Ukrainian nationalist groups. So that's something that Poland is going to be hoping they can get some movement on from the Ukrainian side. But I don't envisage there being much problems there. Whether or not the exhumation happens now during the war remains to be seen, but it's definitely something that there is a broad understanding between Kyiv and Warsaw on this issue. Back to you in the studio, Benjamin.
Thank you so much, Oz, for the update. And meanwhile, please stay safe out there. Really appreciate it. Thanks. Kyiv has become a hub of diplomatic activity this week, with top Western diplomats visiting the Ukrainian capital. Ukraine is also on the agenda in Washington, where British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is set to meet U.S. President Joe Biden. The leaders will reportedly discuss the use of long-range missiles by the Ukrainian military. Let's take a closer look.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski and his Lithuanian counterpart Gabrielius Landsbergis are in Kyiv, where they met Ukraine's new top diplomat, Andriy Sybiha. This visit is the latest in a series of high-level diplomatic meetings which took place in Kyiv this week. All the while, Russian missiles continue to batter Ukrainian cities and villages daily. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Foreign Minister David Lammy are in Washington, where they will meet with US President Biden later today to discuss the ongoing war in Ukraine. Lammy visited Kyiv earlier this week, along with US Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
We come together to express our solidarity in standing with Ukraine, and you know the UK's commitment to see Ukraine win.
The two diplomats pledged about $1.5 billion of aid for Ukraine, but no breakthrough has been reached regarding Kyiv's use of Western long-range weapons on Russian territory. Zelensky's continued pleas to lift all restrictions have been causing a strain on Ukraine's relationship with its Western partners. Nevertheless, Zelensky is planning to soon reveal a victory plan.
I will present a victory plan to President Biden, a system of interconnected decisions which will grant Ukraine enough strength to steer this war on the road to peace.
From Kyiv, Blinken traveled to Warsaw. The U.S. State Secretary praised Poland's support for Ukraine and underscored its role as Kyiv's closest ally.
What we learn from our Ukrainian partners will inform discussions that we'll be having with other allies and other partners in the days and weeks ahead as we work through and think through the coming months. And it's very fitting for us to begin that conversation with our allies here in Poland.
Earlier this week, the New York Times reported that the U.S. seems ready to approve the use of long-range missiles against targets in Russia by Ukraine, on the condition that the weapons were not those provided by the United States.
The missiles are important, the long-range missiles are important, not in and of themselves, but as part of a whole range of ongoing support for Ukraine, not only to defend itself, but finally to convince Vladimir Putin that it's time to stop trying to conquer Kyiv.
Zelensky plans to reveal his victory plan when he travels to the U.S. for the United Nations General Assembly. Earlier this month, he announced that he would present the plan not only to Biden, but also Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
Russia has officially announced the expulsion of 6 British diplomats on espionage charges, though these diplomats had already left the country weeks earlier. Joining us now is our UK correspondent Claudia Chavinska with more on the story. Claudia, it seems a bit unusual for Russia to release this statement now, considering that these diplomats have already left weeks ago. What's going on?
It may seem like this is quite an unusual occurrence, but make no mistake, there is no coincidence there, Ben. Looking at the events of days past, considering the meeting of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken with Foreign Secretary David Lammy here in the United Kingdom, then later the announcement of them traveling to Kyiv, the visit which took place, and today's visit of Prime Minister Keir Starmer to Washington to meet with President Joe Biden to talk about Ukraine, it's no coincidence that Russia is actually making this statement right now. We know that the Russian FSB, a secret service, revoked accreditation of 6 British diplomats on charges of espionage, and I quote, for threatening Russia's security, as apparently, I quote, numerous unfriendly steps were taken by London. So there's been a very clear connection between these events taking place. We obviously heard from UK's Foreign Office stating that the Russian allegations are, I quote, completely baseless. So there's no reason to believe that these 6 diplomats who had their accreditation revoked were actually involved in any espionage on the Russian soil. But this is going to definitely affect the way in which the UK-Russian diplomatic relations are as of now. And I think the best way to put it is just to listen to James Nixie, who's the director of Russia and Eurasia program at the Chatham House. So let's hear what he had to say on the topic.
Obviously, relations between the UK and Russia could barely be worse. This is, I guess, one step towards the total cutting off of all diplomatic relations and ambassadors being sent home and embassies closed and potentially even repurposed. But we're not quite there yet. But it does seem to me as though the UK does and always has done drawn a specific particular level of ire from the Russians.
So we are looking into a very dynamic situation with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer about to meet with US President Joe Biden and make that decision, as our viewers heard in a report just before, about whether or not the West will actually allow Ukraine to use long-range missiles provided by the West in order to hit the targets on a Russian mainland. We will be finding out more. I will be also reporting on the decisions that will be made because everything, especially in terms of Ukraine, the decisions that are going to be made will be fundamental, not only for Ukraine, but also for the West. Back to you, Ben.
All right, thank you. So as you said, a very dynamic situation indeed. Please keep us posted. Meanwhile, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Poland braces for Boris, the Genoese low-pressure system, bringing heavy rainfall to both the Czech Republic and southern Poland. Water levels in several rivers are already approaching alarming heights.
It's already raining cats and dogs in the south of Poland. According to experts from the Institute of Meteorology and Water Management, the total rainfall could amount to over 300 liters per square meter by the end of the weekend. Flood warnings have been issued for many regions of the country. Southern Poland should be most affected, especially the urban areas. As of Friday afternoon, a state of emergency has been announced on 3 rivers in Lower Silesia. In Wrocław, all outdoor events are to be called off.
The south of the Lower Silesia and Opole regions will be the most sensitive point on the map because rivers there will rise significantly, which may result in local flooding.
The local governments of regions that are at risk of flooding had been preparing in advance. On Friday morning, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk visited the region to ensure its residents that authorities and emergency services are ready for different scenarios.
As of today, there is no reason for panic, but there is a reason to be fully mobilized in those areas where dramatic events may unfold.
Polish Minister of Defense Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz said on Friday that the army is also at the ready.
Land forces, sappers, helicopters, floating transporters, boats and military personnel needed for evacuation or securing the embankments stand prepared.
The concern over potential flooding stems partly from Poland's past experiences. Memories from 1997, the year the flood of the millennium hit Lower Silesia, are still vivid. In fact, many compare the rainfall expected this weekend with the events from 31 years ago. However, experts say that this is not a valid comparison.
Back then, as much as 500 to 600 liters of water fell per square meter. Now, the forecasts talk about 300 to 350 liters of rainfall, although locally it could be more.
Heavy rainfall is expected till the end of the weekend. Other countries of the region are also affected, especially the Czech Republic. Hungary, Austria and Slovakia are also experiencing major difficulties.
Butter prices in Poland are climbing once again, further straining consumers already coping with soaring food costs. This upward trend is expected to continue through the Christmas season.
Polish consumers are bracing for further increases in butter prices. In recent months, butter prices have surged by about 15%, and experts predict more hikes ahead. Inflation and global supply chain issues are significantly impacting the food industry, with dairy products taking a hit. Data from recent years paints a clear picture of the rising trend in butter prices. In 2015, the average price for butter in Poland stood at €0.82 per unit. Fast forward to 2022 and the price surged to €1.50, with a similar estimate expected for 2024. Despite minor fluctuations, the cost of butter has climbed consistently over the past years, driven by rising production costs and supply shortages. In an exclusive interview with Business Arena, Mariusz Dziewulski, an analyst at the Polish bank PKO BP, explained that several factors are contributing to the spike in prices.
Butter is currently the fastest growing food product in terms of price. This is driven by a global drop in milk production due to high farming costs and heat stress affecting cows, as well as last year's shift in European dairy production towards more profitable goods like aged cheeses.
The sharp rise in butter prices can also be seen on the European Energy Exchange, where the price of a ton of butter is currently hovering around €8,000. These prices reflect the strain on supply chains and the ongoing inflationary pressures affecting the dairy sector across Europe. With Christmas fast approaching, demand for butter is expected to peak, adding more pressure on prices in Europe. The rising cost of dairy products, alongside other staples like eggs and bread, are making it increasingly difficult for households to manage grocery bills.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, alongside his Lithuanian counterpart Gabrielius Landsbergis, is currently visiting Kyiv amidst ongoing Russian attacks. Sikorski's visit comes at a critical time as Ukraine's pleas for air defense and the right to target Russian military installations intensify. With growing diplomatic pressure and discussions on long-range missile strikes, Sikorski asserts that Ukraine's endurance is not infinite. Joining us today on TVP World to discuss this crucial diplomatic moment is Marcin Zaborowski, Director of Policy at Globsec's Future for Security Program. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you for having me.
So the foreign minister mentioned that Ukraine's endurance is not infinite. How does this statement reflect current tensions and Ukraine's war strategy?
Well, clearly, Ukraine is now at war for 2.5 years. I mean, the third anniversary is actually coming up in February, and no nation can cope with constant daily attacks being unaffected. And of course, the Ukrainians are at the end of what they can put up with. Just like imagine if you are a Ukrainian family who stayed in Ukraine and you are thinking about, like, should I redo my house? Can I go on holidays? What about my career? Where my kids were, to what kind of school I should be, choosing for my kids. So people have these kind of decisions on suspense, and that is clearly affecting morale, ability to continue resistance. And this is a large nation. Ukraine at its peak had about 45 million people. Now it's less because a lot of people repatriated, including to this country. But still, if you compare it with the resources that Russia has, the largest country in the world, population of 120 million, large economy, almost infinite resources of gas, oil, and very, very large military. So putting up a resistance against the nation like that is obviously very, very difficult, and Ukraine, as an ally of the West, must be helped in any way possible that we can imagine.
Right, like I said, it's really hard to imagine functioning, living a normal life with artillery constantly pounding your infrastructure for over 1,000 days. I think Sikorski also alluded at allowing the use of Western weapons inside Russia. Well, recently Putin said, on Thursday actually, that NATO would be directly at war with Russia if it allowed Ukraine to strike Russian territory with Western-made long-range missiles, while the Polish Prime Minister has called the threat an indication of the difficult situation the Russians are in at the front. What's your take on this threat, on this issue?
Well, this is obviously the psychological warfare going on here. What the Russians are saying, you shouldn't be doing this, or you shouldn't be doing that, because otherwise there will be an escalation and you will be putting your population under threat. And we've seen it many times before. And every single time when we were providing Ukraine with tanks, with Patriot missiles, with F-16, every single time we heard from the Russians, if you do that, then that will be the end of everything and we will attack you. Well, that didn't happen. Now even we are in a situation that Ukrainians themselves are occupying a part of the Russian territory in the Kursk region, where they had a successful offensive. And nothing really, in terms of Russian reaction, extraordinary happened. I mean, they didn't use a nuclear weapon, they didn't overreact in any kind of a scary way. So this is just a war of words, and I think that Ukrainians have a right to hit the targets from the territory which is used to attack themselves. Yeah? Just like any other nation is allowed to do that.
Right, and like you mentioned, these red lines were drawn, erased, and redrawn against numerous times. And with the saber rattling of the use of nuclear weapon is also, we see it again and again. So you think the Polish Prime Minister is essentially calling him out on the bluff when he made that statement?
I think, of course, he is. He's saying, Ukrainians have the right to defend themselves. And we shouldn't be intimidated by this kind of psychological warfare. Vladimir Putin is maybe using this kind of threats less often, but the former president Medvedev, on numerous occasions, threatened to use nuclear weapons against Poland and other nations, and he also threatened the nuclear annihilation of the West. And everybody knows that this is a nonsense. Nobody takes the guy seriously, even though he's a deputy national security advisor. And that they just do these kind of things, and when you see it in the headlines, the Russians are happy with its headlines, but it doesn't mean anything.
Right. So now we know that the Foreign Minister Sikorski's visit to Kyiv is a part of a flurry of diplomatic visits to Ukraine in recent days. We saw a lot of movements just in the past few days. Do you think this is a sign of maybe potential peace negotiations with Russia underway, or does this urgency have anything to do with the U.S. election, or maybe Zelensky having to propose a peace plan going into the United States?
I would not put it in the context of a peace negotiation plan. That idea was clearly established there between the German Chancellor and Vladimir Zelensky. So they are essential to making it happening. I'm sure that the Americans were in the loop. The Polish and Lithuanian presence in Ukraine these days is a kind of a routine thing. This is what we do very frequently. It's a show of support, which politicians of various stripes in Poland do, and Poland remains, and as well as Lithuania, remain essential providers of aid to Ukraine from the very early stages on.
Very much so. Speaking of this victory plan that Zelensky is supposed to propose to the United States, how do you think that might affect Western support, especially from Poland and the U.S.?
Well, I think at the moment it's a we are in the midst of a diplomatic game, really. That's what it is, the plan. The former peace conference, which happened in Switzerland, was inconclusive. And one of the reasons why it's being seen as was inconclusive, it was because Russia wasn't invited. And the consequence of that was that Russian-friendly nations like the Indians, the Saudis, Brazilians, they didn't sign up to the declaration. And they had the argument of the sort, you exclude Russia, so we don't want to take sides, that's not okay. Now, it's very important to Zelensky to say that, I invite Russia. Russia can be a part of this conversation. And he is making it difficult for the Russians to say, we don't want to take part, because then they will be immediately questioned by Brazilians, by Indians, by the Chinese and the others, saying, we want peace, we want that thing to end. We are on your side.
Right.
Yeah, we will continue to buy your stuff, but we need to make you some kind of a gesture here.
Right. So the excuse of not being invited is no longer valid.
Exactly.
If Ukraine kind of show goodwill, if you will, but Russia refuses to attend.
Exactly.
Do you think that's what's gonna happen in the second iteration of the peace summit?
Well, I don't think that the summit will actually deliver peace, and I'm not sure that it will even happen. And we are talking about the talks right now. Yeah. And at this point in time, it's important for the Ukrainians to show that they are forthcoming, that they don't exclude anybody, that they have initiative, that they have a peace plan, that they thought it through. They don't need to convince the West. The West is with them. But they need to convince the Indians, the Chinese, the Koreans even are wavering on some issues. So the rest of the world needs to be with Ukraine on that, and we don't have it at this point in time. When we say that the world has isolated Russia, that's not quite true. It's the West which isolated Russia, not the world.
Right, and I think Russia's also trying to present itself as not being isolated, being very frequently engaged in the BRICS nations. Do you think that might lead us to kind of a parallel world where these Russian-friendly countries operate in a vacuum outside of the Western nation, or do you think that the world is in a state that this is no longer a possibility?
We have a bit of a repetition of the Cold War time, when we had on one side we had the West, and on the other side we had the Warsaw Pact nations, the allies of the Soviet Union. And in the middle of that, we have the so-called non-allied nations. And that was a movement which was led by the Indians. The former Yugoslavia was also very much implicated in that. And now we see a lot of nations want to be non-allied. Yeah? We don't want to criticize Russia. We are very happy to buy this cheap oil and gas from Russia at discount price. At the same time, we want to do business with the West. Yeah? So there are a lot of nations which are saying that they can use the situation to their advantage, and some of them Indians in particular are making a lot of money out of it.
Right, very much so. Thank you so much for your input and insight. I really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us, TVP World.
Thank you.
Cheers. And thank you for watching this edition of World News Tonight. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.